Two final topics round out our conversation here on installing Windows Server, the first of which being a discussion here on upgrades and migrations. And this is one of those interesting conversations here because the actual content in performing specifically migrations is quite a bit further than really what we can discuss here in this course. One reason for that is that the migrations themselves actually can be very different for each individual role, depending on what you're trying to migrate. And so what I'd rather do here is just take a quick review or a quick overview of the different ways in which you will get Windows Server 2016 in your environment. We have talked here so far about the clean install route, effectively installing Windows Server onto a machine with an empty hard drive. The clean install option is in some ways kind of the best option because you know what you're getting into. This machine has no prior history that you have to worry about, and that whole sense of garbage in, garbage out. And so the clean install with, as we'll talk about here in just a second, the role migration can in many ways be kind of a superior experience because you tend to get rid of all your prior, perhaps not great decisions you may have made during the years that that prior operating system was in operation. Now, this version, like other versions, also has the abilities to do upgrades. You can actually perform upgrades of Windows Server, but there are some interesting consequences with those upgrades. Again, the garbage in, garbage out whole mentality there for all your prior decisions that you may have made in other configurations. One thing to note with the upgrade is that Microsoft recommends the upgrade process, or really its suggestion for upgrades, has to do with, here in the quote, VMs, but you could also argue this with hosts, do not have specific OEM hardware drivers. What Microsoft says here on TechNet is that the upgrade works best in VMs where specific OEM hardware drivers are not required or needed for a successful upgrade. If you've tried to do an upgrade in the past and you've worked with some of these hardware drivers, you know why Microsoft is making this recommendation. By doing a complete system install and rolling those services over onto that new machine, you have quite a bit more flexibility in how you go about manifesting this upgrade. So I tend not to focus too much on the upgrade process here, just simply because in a lot of environments it can be fraught with danger. Now, that is not the only way in which we can get our services rolled onto this new operating system version. One such other way is one that Microsoft actually is touting quite a bit in this version because the cluster team has put a lot of investment into making the rolling upgrade of your Windows failover cluster hosts just that much easier. Now, the point here, and we'll talk more about this in a later course on failover clustering and the high availability options in Server 2016, but one of the points here is the fact that a Windows failover cluster is designed to more or less never go down, and by that I mean the individual services. And so this rolling upgrade here is a way in which you can actually roll the upgrade from a previous version to a new version while still manifesting the cluster as an entire entity. Windows failover clustering in this version supports the abilities to operate in this hybrid mode for a short period of time as you go through the rolling upgrade, and I apply special emphasis here mostly because Microsoft themselves is applying the same level of emphasis as it relates to their cluster operating system, or really Windows failover clustering itself. This makes most sense for environments that are using, for example, Hyper-V. Now, environments everywhere use clustering for different purposes, but in the case of Hyper-V, where you have virtual machines that are running on top of that cluster, you can imagine where this rolling upgrade and a seamless rolling upgrade can become really, really important. We also have the abilities here in this version to do what's termed a license conversion, which is effectively taking one edition of Microsoft Windows and converting it to another by way of just adding in a different license. And there are some limitations here with license conversion. I want to talk just a bit about what those limitations are, and then also just the commands you might use if you need to go through the conversion of a license. Conversion is not in this version supported on Server Core. Strangely enough, it's only available on the full desktop experience installation option. It's also not available there on domain controllers. So if you do plan on changing the version or changing the license on that machine, well, you're not going to be able to do it with your DCs. The slmgr command that we talked about before is handy here for figuring out if you've installed an evaluation version of the operating system. What's great to know is that if you have installed an eval version and then later go about purchasing an actual version, well, Microsoft has an upgrade path for you by replacing that eval key. If you run this command with the DLV parameter, that will actually give you a list of information about the licensing for that computer. And if you see eval there in the output, well, you know that you need to get that key updated to an actual key before the time bomb happens there. I think it's 180 days there on the time bomb. You can accomplish that first by using the dism command. This is not a PowerShell command, but a legacy command prompt command. There with /online and /getCurrentEdition to identify the installed edition. You'll need the results of that information to put into the next command here, also a dism command, right there for the set edition parameter. So it's here where you identify your edition and then add in the product key to then relicense this with a new version of the key that you have. This command can be used to get an eval copy over to a production or a real copy. It can also be used to convert a standard edition instance of the OS there to a data center edition. It is not possible to go in the other direction from data center to standard, and that actually makes a lot of sense considering the other features that are added once you make that move to data center edition. So these license conversions are here if you went down the eval route and don't want to have to reinstall the OS to get yourself into an actual license key, or also to change an edition in that case where you maybe bought a standard and then need to upgrade to a data center version. Now, the last of these is the role migration option here, which is a big part of anytime you're doing a massive upgrade from one OS version to the other. It is also the most difficult to try to teach in a course like what we're working with here. And the reason for that is because role migrations are independent or individual for each version of the role, or really each role that you've got there on that machine. And so what I'd like to do here is just take a minute to show you for these migrations, just a couple of bits that are here on the TechNet website that I can direct you towards to give you a feel for the individual activities that are going to be required. Here is a website here in TechNet called Install Server with Desktop Experience, where I want to come down here and show you the migration view, which really I just want to point your attention here to a table that Microsoft has provided for each of the server roles you can see over here on the left. This gives you a feel for each of these server roles. Can it be migrated? Is it upgradable? How actually do you get that role onto the new version? And the whole list here exists for many of the major roles that exist in Windows Server. I do also want to show you that at least as of the time of this filming, there is a second website here on TechNet titled Migrating Roles and Features in Windows Server. It is this location where at some point Microsoft will populate this middle section here with a set of migration guides that will be functionally similar to those that you see down here on the bottom for Windows Server 2012 R2. Again, I tell you that these guides are very different for each of the roles that you're working with. There's a lot of steps for some and there's just a couple of steps for others. But as Microsoft goes through populating these guides, this is the location where you'll go to get that specific guidance. Be aware that at present, Microsoft suggests that the migration process for many of these roles is kind of sort of the similar in 2016 as was it in 2012 R2. Your mileage may vary, so you might want to test it out, but be prepared for Microsoft really just kind of updating some of the numbers here and maybe some slight guidance changes as they go through creating these new migration guides for Server 2016.